For generations, people have told each other ghost stories and cautionary tales to scare their friends, but the age-old tradition of telling scary stories has gotten an upgrade with creepypastas. What is a creepypasta? For those of you who do not already know, a creepypasta, as you guessed it, is a scary story or urban legend that is shared throughout websites, social media, and chat rooms, becoming internet folklore, and is talked about both on and offline. Some of them are far from horrifying, while some will leave you lying awake in bed at night. With that, let's talk about 5 of the scariest creepypastas of all time. Candle Cove. Users in a chat room recall watching a TV show called Candle Cove back in the early 1970s. Candle Cove was a low-budget pirate show featuring characters like a little girl named Janice or Jade, Pirate Piercy, Horace the Horrible, and the Skin Taker, played by creepy-looking marionette puppets. The Skin Taker scared the users the most. He's a skeletal figure whose mouth slid back and forth. The girl would ask why his mouth moved like that, and he would reply, "To grind your skin." He wore a hat and a cape, which the users think is made of children's skin. One episode had the puppets just start screaming for no reason, and the girl just sat there, moaning and crying. That episode left the users traumatized and haunted by constant nightmares of the show. One user, Mike Painter 65, wondering why he was ever allowed to watch this show, went to visit his mother and asked her about it. Surprised that he still remembered Candle Cove, his mother told him that he would turn the TV to dead air and stare at the screen for 30 minutes, saying that he was watching his favorite pirate show. Jeff the Killer. Jeff was a kid who moved into a new neighborhood with his family. One day, while he and his brother were waiting for a school bus, 3 kids came by and pulled out knives on them. Jeff got up to defend himself and his brother. They left the scene, leaving the 3 kids with broken wrists and knife wounds. A couple of days later, he attended a neighbor's birthday party, and the 3 kids showed up to finish what they'd started. They beat Jeff senseless, but he fought back. He kills one of them while leaving another bleeding to death. Unfortunately, Jeff suffered major injuries, including being severely burned, but he managed to recover from his injuries. He was released from the hospital, and that night his mom heard him crying in the bathroom. She went in and was horrified by what she'd seen. Jeff carving a permanent smile into his cheeks and cutting off his eyelids. She went to wake her husband, but Jeff was standing at the door, and the last thing his mother heard was, "Mommy, you lied," and then he proceeded to stab them both. He went to his brother's room, he placed his hand over his brother's mouth and said, "Shh, just go to sleep." Jeff has never been seen since, and some say that he's looking for his next victim. Go to sleep. The Expressionless. For Cedar Sinai Hospital, it's not entirely out of the ordinary for someone to come in for medical attention as accidents happen near the hospital. But one night in June of 1972 was something that people would never forget. A woman entered the hospital in nothing but a white gown covered in blood. That doesn't sound so bad, right? Think again. The hospital staff noticed something strange about this woman. She had a face that resembled a mannequin's, and she had a dead kitten clamped in between her jaws, so inhumanly tight. She spits out the dead kitten, showing rows of jagged, sharp teeth, and one of the staff members asks, "What in the hell are you?" The woman looked up at him smiling and darted towards him, ripping out his jugular. As he took his final breath, she whispered in his ear, "I am God." She feasted on 2 security guards before escaping into the night, never to be seen again. The survivor of the ordeal called her the Expressionless. Russian sleep experiment. After World War II, Russian researchers granted 5 prisoners freedom, falsely, if they would have agreed to an experimental gas that would keep them awake, tested on them. They were put in a chamber where they were provided with books, cots to sleep on, running water and toilet, and enough food for them to last over a month. They were fine during the first 5 days of the experiment, but after 5 days passed, they began to make complaints about what would lead up to their current state, and they started showing signs of severe paranoia. After 9 days passed, one of the subjects screamed so loud that he tore his own vocal cords, and another 2 subjects ripped pages out of the books, smeared them with their own feces, and plastered them all over the glass. After 3 more days passed, the subjects in the chamber were silent. So the researchers used the microphones, hoping to get reactions out of them. The researchers told them that they were opening the chamber to test the microphones. Anyone who tried to escape would be shot, and compliance would earn one of the subjects immediate freedom. One of the subjects responded with, "We no longer want to be freed." They flushed the gas, and the subjects started begging for the gas to be turned back on. Soldiers walked in to find one of the subjects dead, and chunks of his flesh stuffed in the drain. The other 4 subjects disemboweled themselves, eating their own flesh despite being provided with enough rations to last them for over a month. The remaining 4 received immediate medical attention. One subject's spleen ruptured and bled to death. One was given 10 times the human dose of morphine. His heart stopped beating, and even after that, he flailed and screamed for 3 minutes before dying. The remaining subjects had surgery performed on them. One was immune to the sedative given to him, and his heart stopped after struggling in his restraints. The second one requested to be operated without anesthetic gas, and after the operation, his vocal cords were severely damaged, but he was given a pen and pad and he wrote, "Keep cutting." The other subjects were also operated on without the use of anesthetic gas, and one of them said, "I must remain awake." The remaining 3 were put back into the chamber, one died, and one of the 2 whose vocal cords were still intact started screaming. The commander gave an order to seal the 2 subjects inside, along with the 3 researchers. One of the researchers pulled out a gun on the commander and shot him. He killed the remaining subjects as well, putting an end to the experiment. Gateway of the Mind. In the early 1980s, a group of scientists conducted an experiment to make contact with God. Their theory stated that if a human was deprived of their 5 senses or any form of stimuli, they would be able to perceive God's presence. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for volunteered in participating in the experiment. They surgically severed all his sensory nerves, connecting to his brain, and he could not taste, feel, hear, see, or smell anything. He was not able to communicate or sense the outside world in any way. It was just him and his thoughts. 4 days passed. The man claimed to hear indistinguishable voices, but the scientists thought of it to be some kind of psychosis. 2 days passed. The man started crying, saying he could hear and communicate with his dead wife. The scientists weren't convinced until he started naming their dead relatives and saying things that only they would have known. A week passed. He became distressed, saying that the voices became overwhelming, and harmed himself to get a pain response. He requested to be sedated so he could sleep, which did work, but only temporarily. After 3 days, he started having awful nightmares. A day later, he started screaming and clawing at where his eyes used to be, hoping to sense something in the physical world. He said the voices became deafening and hostile, speaking about hell and the end of the world. For 5 hours straight, he screamed, "No heaven! No forgiveness!" He begged to be put out of his misery, but the scientists think he was getting closer to making contact with God. Another day passed. He was not able to speak clearly and started tearing at his own flesh. They had to restrain him, and after he stopped struggling and screaming, he stared at the ceiling crying. They had kept him hydrated for 2 weeks because of the constant crying. Despite being blind, he made eye contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and He has abandoned us." And his vital signs stopped. The cause of death is unknown.